98% of their parenting was toward man-child number one to prepare them. And Rehoboam didn't listen. We see that when we get to Rehoboam's life in the stories of the kings. But it's interesting with that in the back of our mind to read through the first few chapters in the book of Proverbs where there's a lot of my son, my son, my son. And what does Solomon have to say to my son? Kind of looking at these first couple chapters, but working backwards here. I've got you in Matthew chapter 7. Obviously, I'm not there. If you want to go to Proverbs, you can, and just hold your place in Matthew. Again, that's where we'll pick up in just a moment. If you just want to make some notes, I think I've got the references on your handout. If you want to make a couple notes next to it, you could do that too. In chapter 4, just the beginning of the chapter here, hear you children the instruction of a father, attend to no understanding. So listen and pay attention. Hear it, attend to it. For I give you good doctrine. Forsake ye not my law, for I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also, and said unto me, let thine heart attain my words. Keep my commandments and live. Notice there's more involved here than simply hearing what's going on. It's listen and put it to practice. I've known people, perhaps you have, who went to college and studied for a particular field, did well, got out of college, and decided they really didn't like that field. It was not what they thought it was going to be. And honestly, that's a decision they have to make. I can't tell them what they need to do or what they should do. If you get into the field and it's not what you like, why do something you're miserable with every day? Okay? Here, Solomon's saying, hey, listen and put it to practice. Don't just listen so that you have a head full of facts. Listen so you can do something with it. And then he gets into the discussion on wisdom. Get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Wisdom is the principal thing. And she'll bring you great honor and glory. And that's in Proverbs 4. Well, in Proverbs 3, we have something somewhat similar. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. For the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. He gives wisdom and places a value on it. He says, get wisdom because wisdom is more valuable than great riches. Now look around us in the world today. We have a lot of people who are striving for riches. I've got a guy at work. He works in my area. He's a trainer, so he's not a typical, normal, everyday package handler, but he's kind of a hybrid. If there are no new hires, then his job is to load boxes. If there are new hires, his job is to teach them how to load boxes. Okay? But he's a young kid. In fact, he's just with us for another couple of months, and then he's going to school. And I was asking him the other day, so what are you going to study when you go to school? And he's probably going to study finance, because there's good money in finance. He was going to study medicine to be a doctor because there's good money there, but he decided he didn't want to do doctoring. Which, this is just me personally, I would prefer to have doctors that want to doctor. Okay? If you don't want to, then work on them, not me. It's just me personally. Smart kid, I don't know, he may do well with whatever he goes into. We've got to make sure that we're not simply smart, but that we know how to use our smarts. Okay, we know what to do with them. We live in a world where there is so much information available. You've probably heard the term, I've used the term, I don't know that I've used it in Sunday school before, information overload. Okay? Welcome to 2023, right? Josie and I are driving in this morning. Coming down 15, she loves Cracker Barrel. Not so much the food, she likes the store. And so we very seldom go to Cracker Barrel, not because of the food, but because of getting Josie through the store. And she says, I heard Cracker Barrel's closing. I said, where did you hear that? Well, when we open up our Chromebooks at school, the news comes up first, and that's, Cracker Barrel's not closing, okay? But That's a piece of information that she saw on a computer screen. The information is everywhere, and some of it's true, and some of it's not. How many times do you see news headlines on your phone, on the computer, wherever, and it is really out there, but it's trying to grab your attention and get you to read a story, okay? Information overload. Solomon's talking to his son here, and he says, hey, you need the information, but you need information that you can use and put to practice in life. I was listening, I've got a friend, he and I used to work together at summers at a big Christian camp in Tennessee. He's actually the pastor of First Baptist Church Hammond now, Pastor John Wilkerson. And I was listening to John the other day. He started a summer, might be Wednesday night, started a summer series on the book of Proverbs. He's not going through verse by verse, he's just hitting some key topics. And if you start in Proverbs, one of the first things you hit here is wisdom. And I don't recall his definition. I was going to write it down, but I wasn't in a place where I had a paper, pen, or even my phone handy. But it's one of those things. We hear a lot about wisdom and equate it with knowing things, and that's not it. It's knowing how to do things God's way is what biblical wisdom is. And the world we live in, unfortunately, even within the church, we don't like to do things God's way. We have the information. We have all the information we need available, but taking that and putting it to practice is a whole nother story. And that's what we're getting to today. The title, as you have on your handout there, Searching for Wisdom, looking for the means of information so that we can do things God's way. Proverbs 2, Solomon starts out much the same way. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. And that's what he's continuing. Hey, listen and learn what we have to say. And then the last one, the introduction to the book. And I just want to look at verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Do you know anybody like that? Don't be like that. Be the one who understands, hey, if I am going to do things and have a successful life based on God's terms and definitions, if I'm going to have a successful life, then I need to know how to do things His way. And I need to then do things His way. And that's Solomon as he's writing here. He's writing to his son, and God saved it for all of us. Listen and learn how to put to practice what you've learned. Searching for wisdom. There's a lot tucked in here. Proverbs chapter, let's try this. Matthew chapter 7, just a couple of verses here, 24 through 27. Matthew 7, 24. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken them unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. Hey, we know this story, don't we? How many of you learned about the wise man that built his house upon the rock back in Sunday school when you were about yay tall? And the wise man built his house upon the rock, and the foolish man built his house upon the sand. And the end result was the house on the sand collapsed, it fell. The wise man builds his house on the rock. The rains descend, the floods come, the winds blow, beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened to the foolish man. And the people are here, and notice what it says, and it's not in the reference that I have there, but look at verse 28. It came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, so we're at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. The conclusion is, if you listen to what I said and put it to practice, you're a wise man. If you don't put it to practice, you're a foolish man. And the foolish man's efforts end in destruction. There's his final conclusion to what in our Bibles is a multi-chapter sermon. And the people are, wow, we've never heard anything like that before. They're astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, and I love this next part, not as the scribes. He taught them as one who had authority to speak, not one who was just speaking to speak. They heard him. This conclusion listen and learn, be a wise man. And the people are dumbfounded. We've never heard anything like this before. Well, Jesus had just taught that his way of doing things was different. It was unique. It was unusual. Often throughout this, he will use the statement where he'll say, "You've heard it said unto you, but I say," and there's a number of places where he uses that statement or one very similar to it. "This is what you've been taught, but I've got a new teaching for you." And force them to think. Wisdom here, wisdom is found in a relationship with Christ. If wisdom is a biblical concept, and it has to do with knowing what God wants and knowing how to do it God's way, the only way that can happen, and we've used the reference before, we talked about it over the last couple of weeks, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. So the only way I can know and understand things God's way is if the Spirit is working within. And that's a relationship. And there are two accepted responses. Hear what I'm saying, do what I've said. Hearing and doing. Those are the two accepted responses. If they did anything else, Agrippa, let me file that away and I'll think about it later. If he actually thinks about it later, that's good, but that's not an acceptable response. Because what if he dies tonight? It requires us to hear and then put to practice what we hear. Hearing and doing determine our usefulness to God. Again, the guy who goes to school and learns and learns and learns and learns and learns and never uses what he learns. He has a fancy degree and a diploma up on his wall, but what's the point? What was the use? Or we could say, what good is it? Usefulness. Or, in the case of the foolish man, uselessness, right? Well, what is wisdom? What is wisdom? There are a couple of different views to this. We're not going to take a lot of time with this. I was using more time with the introduction today, but there's a helicopter view where you can see the big picture, or the dashboard, where you're sitting in the seat and you can see what's right in front of you. Jose and I pulled out of our neighborhood today, got onto Wesley, and before we even made it a quarter mile down Wesley, had Lower Allen police flying by with lights and sirens going. Had one go, and I look in the rearview mirror, hey, they turned into my neighborhood. Made it a couple hundred more feet, and another car comes. Made it a couple hundred more feet, here comes the ambulance. Don't have any idea what's going on. But if I was sitting up in the sky and had the big, I could see exactly where they were going. All I can do is see what's right in front of me. And that's kind of the way we live life, isn't it? All we can see is what is right in front of us. But God knows the beginning from the end. He can see the entire story. He knows everything that's going on. Wisdom is not having God's perspective. Because if wisdom was seeing things the way God sees them, then I would know exactly what the outcome of every decision is. Stop and think for a moment of the different decisions in life that you've made and how sometimes the insignificant decision had long-lasting results and effects or impacts. Wisdom is not having God's perspective of the whole matter. It's having God's perspective about what the next response is, to honor Him while we're still usable to Him. One of the things that sometimes young people struggle with is knowing God's will. You know what God's will is, in a nutshell? Doing what I'm supposed to do today. I have no idea the twists and turns that God's going to put in front of me in days, months, and years to come. But I can do what I'm supposed to do right now. And if I do what I'm supposed to do right now, if I take the right step, if each step is the right step, then guess what? I'll end up where I'm supposed to end up. But if I know where I'm supposed to go, but I'm not watching each step, I can keep my eye on the prize here, and I'm going in the wrong direction. I need to make sure that each step is where God wants it to be, that each step is what God wants me to do. Wisdom is not knowing why things happen. Wisdom is knowing what to do when those things happen. How often do we focus on the why? God, why is this happening? Think of Paul. Paul says, he gives his whole life story here. His life story is pretty much wrapped up. I was shipwrecked, I was stoned, I was beaten and left for dead. He has this thorn in the flesh. And I besought the Lord 3 times that he'd take it away. I mean, Paul looks back and says, why is this happening? Because it was ordered by God that God would be glorified through what Paul had to say. Don't know all the details, but God had a purpose. In Romans 8, we know that all things work together for good. Who gets to form the definition of what is good? My definition of good and God's definition of good for me are not always the same, are they? All things work together for good. To them who love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. God is the one who gets to define what is good. Hey, good is a nice job and a nice house and a nice car, and what if God says, no, good is struggling and suffering so that you can show my glory to the people around you. And that's a challenge, that's a tough one. Wisdom isn't knowing why, wisdom is knowing what to do when those things happen. Well, what is the path to wisdom? This is a really long note. If you look in your notes here, there's one point here. Listening with the intent to practice. How do I get wisdom? Listen so that I know what to do. And that's where, as a teacher, as a parent, now again, I'm looking at my definitions, not always the same as the Bible definition. I always differentiate between hearing and listening. I can hear. From right here, I hear the projectors running. The fans are blowing, okay? But that doesn't mean I'm listening intently so I can tell if anything's right or wrong. I like cars. I am not what you would define as a car guy, okay? A car guy, I hear noise. The car goes by and he can tell you all the specs of the engine of that car and what kind of exhaust and muffler system it has. I don't ride motorcycles. I've had zero interest in riding a motorcycle. I like looking at them, but I'm not interested in riding, have no interest in buying. A bike guy, you say, hey, that's a nice motorcycle. You better sit down for a long conversation because he's going to tell you all the specs about that bike. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Listening is listening for the intent, or hearing for the intent to do something with it. Well, here's a chart. The chart is in the notes. I think I put it in there. There are no blanks, so there's nothing to add to it. Basically, you have a goal at the top, and that's wisdom, having the mind of Christ, knowing what I need to do and how I need to do it God's way. And then it breaks it down, the master discipline, if you will, or the big topic, and then the components that make up that big topic. So you have our 2 goals, our 2 proper responses, hearing and doing. Okay, what is hearing? Hearing is paying attention and thinking about what you're hearing. Doing, how does that accomplish? I need to obey. I need to put it to practice. And I need to keep doing that even when life gets tough. And so you've got attention and meditation for hearing, obedience and endurance for doing. Those are the things that we need to keep in mind if we want to do things God's way. Life is going to be a bed of roses. It's going to be easy all the time. And some of you say, you don't know my life, right? Life is tough. Sometimes it's more than a little bit uncomfortable. So that endurance becomes an important component, doesn't it? We can't just give up because things didn't turn out the way I thought they were going to. So that's kind of the idea of what we're looking at here. Well, the disciplines then of hearing. The disciplines of hearing. For sake of time, I thought about going here, but the parable of the sower or of the seed, or the soils, depending on how you look at it. For sake of time, we're not going to turn to that, but think of the different responses, if you will. First of all, there's the unreceptive, the hard ground. The seed gets cast out, The indifferent is just kind of there. Doesn't take it in whatsoever. He's indifferent to it. Not interested, doesn't care. Then we have the impulsive, the shallow. It takes some root, it grows up quickly, the sun beats upon it, it withers away. It's shallow. The roots can't go deep. It's impulsive. Next, and I like the notes here were from Jim Burke. I like the I here. The infested. It has to do with it's being crowded out. Remember, it was cast out, and it was with all the weeds and the tares and everything, and it grows up. But for the farmer guy, it's a lot of effort, probably more effort than it's worth putting into it to get the few bits of crop that are there. It's crowded out. We'll come back to that idea. We have crowded lives today. The world that we live in is so loud and noisy that the silence truly is deafening for our young people and for many of our adults. If you tell them, just sit and relax, they've got to reach for something, typically a screen. To just sit and enjoy the quiet ain't happening. Life is crowded. But then we had the ideal here, the receptive one, the one who hears the word, receives the word, and does something with the word. Those are the disciplines, if you will, of hearing. Now, think back to the chart. I'm not going to flip back to it, but think back to the chart there. For hearing, we had two basic disciplines under it. So let's look then at attention. Attention. If we're going to actually listen, if we're going to pay attention to what we're hearing, what does that mean? We have to choose to listen to God. All the stuff going on around us, everything taking place, all the things competing for our time and attention. It's a choice that we have to make. It's a choice. I take sermon notes on my phone. I have my Bible app opened up, and I write notes in my Bible. And as much as I don't like to, every 10 years or so, I need a new Bible. Bindings break, pages, something happens. They don't make them the way they used to. Okay. And so all the notes I put in the margins are now sitting on a shelf at home, and I've got a new Bible with empty margins. So typically anymore, when I'm making notes in my Bible, I'm putting that same note in my phone and on my Bible app. So if I'm sitting here or at home, wherever, I can see that note wherever I am as well. Big challenge. You're sitting in church, and preacher says something about a term, word, or whatever. You're like, hey, let me research. It's not the time to research. The time to research is when you get home. Otherwise, you're researching, and he's 3 points down the road before you get back to it. You have to make a choice. Listening requires a choice. We have to choose to listen to God. He must be our complete focus. We have to filter out the noise to hear God. If you want to put I'm not even going to give you the reference. I didn't write it down completely. Elijah after Mount Carmel. Sees the cloud the size of a man's hand, going to bring rain, and he takes off. And he gets out into the woods, into the mountains, fleeing from Jezebel after the great victory, which does not make a bit of sense, but yet so often that's what we deal with. And there's kinds of things happening, and God comes to him in a still, small voice. All these different things compete for time and attention within our lives. So many things. I mean, we deal with it on a regular basis. You sit down to pray, how often does the phone ring? Or you get a notification of some sort. Or you sit down to pray and somebody calls your name from the other room. And none of it necessarily bad, but all competing for time and attention. We need to be able to filter out all that noise if we're going to hear God, if we're going to listen to what he has to say. We need to decide to whom we will listen. Oh, in the age of the interweb, this is a biggie. Because everybody has a mouthpiece, and everybody has their podium to speak or preach from. How do you know who to listen to? And everybody has all the answers to all the questions that you may have, even if their answers are going completely different directions. How do you know who to listen to? There is so much competing for our attention, and we will listen to someone. The question is, to whom will we listen? I mentioned I was listening to one of my friends the other day on their YouTube from the church. How often is it that we might have good intentions? We're going to go to the YouTube and we're going to watch it, and then all of the recommendations pop up, and next thing we know, this is not me. I don't like cats, so this is not me. But next thing we know, we're watching cat videos. Okay. I had good intention. Next thing I know, I lost 2.5 hours of my life watching something that didn't matter. They had no long-lasting impact. One of the things I'm trying to teach Josie right now is that time is a limited commodity. You use your time, you can't buy more. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go get a loan and buy more time? Hezekiah got more time. Joshua got more time when he went to battle and the sun stood still. But for the rest of us, we have a limited commodity. When time is gone, time's gone. I've got 24 hours in this day. Try as hard as I can. I can't get that 25th hour. Well, I can use my time more wisely. That's not getting you more time. That's just being more efficient and effective with your time. Time is limited. So with all this stuff competing for my time and attention, I better choose the things that are the most important. And God better be the most important. Staying with this, we must make it a habit of life, a discipline, to listen to God rather than to listen to our own heart, our own wants and wishes. We need to make it a habit of life. I die daily. We need to sacrifice self each day. And that's tough, because I want what I want. Well, what are you doing today? Most of the time, the answer is something akin to whatever I feel like. Now, you can change the terminology, but that's what it amounts to, right? We need to be a people who say, God, what do you want me to do? And then schedule life around what God wants me to do. And that is a challenge. And so Solomon was writing in Proverbs to encourage his son to hear, to listen, pay attention, learn these things. I will turn here. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm going to read this one verse here from Proverbs 9. And verse 10. Proverbs 9 and verse 10. Solomon's writing. Similar to 1:7. You know what? Let me read 9 and 10. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. So there's wisdom and its effect upon the wise man, the one who wants to learn to do things. Okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. It's not simply having facts. It's, what did Paul say? That I may know him. Paul's great passion was to know more of God. Why? So that he could do more with that information. And if we read through the book of Proverbs, look for those places where Solomon makes such statements, where he makes those statements like, hey, listen and learn and put this to practice, live this. That's the goal, that's the desire. And so attention, part of hearing. And then think on these things, meditate. Meditate, the basic discipline of meditation. Much of the motivation to remember the words of God is tied to the kind of relationship that we have with Him. I will remember the words of those that I think are important. I have never, ever watched one episode of the program. In fact, let me think here. It's got Tim Allen, and it might be Last Man Standing or something like that. I've never seen one episode. But there's a commercial on that I think is absolutely hilarious. The wife's talking to her husband, Tim Allen, and said that the girls are complaining, whatever, that you never listen to them. He turned, what? And isn't that so often the way we are? We hear what God has for us. What? We're not really paying attention. We're not really following along. We're kind of like the guy who sits there. He hears his wife talking. She asks a question, and now he realizes he's in trouble because he has no idea what she's been talking about. And it's like, oh boy, I hope this wasn't an important question. Much of the motivation to remember the words of God is tied to the kind of relationship that we have to Him. If we love Him, we have a passion for God. When He talks, we're listening. Now, years ago, financial services. Remember the commercial? When E.F. Hutton speaks, that commercial hasn't run in, 25 years, because E.F. Hutton doesn't even exist anymore, if I'm not mistaken. I think it got swallowed up. But remember the commercial? When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. Why? Because, go back to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, as one having authority. They knew what they were talking about. What kind of relationship do we have with God? Are we listening? Not only did Solomon encourage his son to hear, he desired him to apply. Forsake not these words. Don't let them depart from you. Don't just hear, remember them. Remember them. David, Psalm 119, talks about thy word shall be a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. It's going to do more than simply be something in my mind. I've got a practical use for it. It's going to help me take each step along this path of life. Don't forget what we've heard. Let's put it to practice. I've got some references there. I think I have the references in your notes. Feel free to look those up later. I should desire Him so much that I keep His words close by me. If I truly have a passion for God, I want to know what He has to say. And if I truly have a passion for God, I want to do what He has said. Tied very closely to that then is, how do we remember not to forget? I am a note taker, okay? Helps me to not forget. However, there's a caveat to that. What good does it do if I take notes if I never refer to said notes? How many times do we make a list so we can do our shopping, and then we do our shopping and never look at the list and get home and realize we forgot something that was right there. It was in my pocket the whole time, and I forgot. How to remember not to forget. We're to continue peering intently into the Word. We need to get into the Word again. Look intently. Look so that I know what it says. Look so that I know how to put it to practice. To make sure that we do not forget what we've heard. We're to continue peering intently into the Word as long as it takes, so that it actually begins to make an impact. It makes a difference within me and in my lifestyle and in my practice. I need to allow the Word to work around in my mind so that it makes a change in me. Quite simply, I need to ponder, I need to meditate, I need to reflect. I mean, think of the different terms that we could use there. But I need to think on this regularly. Well, conclusion. And there are no blanks to fill into the conclusion. Proverbs 1:23. And the note that I have there is look at the sequence, and then I think I have the verse written there, and I just added some parenthetical numbers. First of all, turn you at my reproof. So hear what I have to say, If I'm correcting you, stop and listen. And I will pour out my Spirit upon you. Okay, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. Okay, the Spirit is an essential component here. If I am listening to what God says, He will help me to understand it. And I will make known my words unto you. I will help you to know how to live each day if you'll simply listen and learn. So the question is, are we really listening? Do we listen? Do we hear what God has for us? Do we have a regular time with God? And everybody has a different schedule. You know, we need to have that regular time with God in the morning. Not in my world, we don't. In my world, again, I work nights. This week with the holiday, I had a 5-hour day, a 6-hour day, and then 2 14s. If I come home and want to have my time with God in the morning, my time with God is spent like this. I'm meditating. I'm meditating on the back of my eyelids. So what works for you? We need to have that time when we can allow God to speak to me. Allow God to speak to you. Do I have a regular time with Him? Are we regular in a good church where we're going to hear good Bible preaching? Where we're going to hear the Word of God taught sincerely and genuinely? Are we willingly receiving correction? I don't like correction, and be honest, neither do you. If I go to the doctor, I want the doctor to say, hey, good job, everything's right where it's supposed to be. I do not want to hear the doctor say, you need to make some changes and here's what you need to do. I want the doctor to say that donuts are a regular part of my diet. Okay? That's where I want. You may or may not know, I think it was a Friday? Friday was National Donut Day. Okay? That is the best holiday of the entire year, thank you very much. Don't know about you, but Dunkin' and Duck Donuts were on my schedule that day. But at neither of them could I get as many as I wanted. I will say, it was a blessing physically that there were no Krispy Kremes in the area. Because I think there's an exception clause for Krispy Kreme. But seriously, do we receive correction? Do we receive admonition from spiritual elders? Do those people that God has blessed and given great wisdom and knowledge, do we listen to them even if they tell us that we need to make changes? Do we have things in life, amusements or activities in life that hinder us? Paul wrote, he said, all things are lawful unto me, but not all things are not expedient. He said, hey, I could do these, but I shouldn't do these. Do we make biblical judgment with the activities and amusements in life? Do we decide, hey, you know what, this is not helping me to grow? We mentioned earlier, we need to clear the clutter. And I used a few different terms here. Spam, clutter, noise, weeds, I think was the term I used last week. We need to get rid of those things that are hindering us. We have a limited amount of time. If we don't pay attention during that time, now we're in trouble. So time and attention, we have got to guard them carefully. We're going to listen to somebody. Who are we going to listen to? When God is talking, He's not always here. Hey, you better be listening to me. God doesn't work that way all the time. There's a lot of times that God is saying, hey, do you hear me? I'm talking to you. Pay attention. This is critically important. There's a lot of things in life. What's competing for our time and attention? We need to get rid of the things in the way. And then the last place we'll go here, go to 2 Timothy 3. 2 Timothy 3. Paul is writing. We have I think I can use this term, fairly, the great apostle, is writing to Timothy, a young man that he has truly invested his life in. Keep your place. Turn over one page in my Bible, maybe not yours. Look at chapter 4, verse 7, verse 6. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I finished my course. Paul is confident that his life is coming to a very rapidly coming conclusion. Okay? So he's writing to Timothy here in chapter 3 and saying, hey, here's something, this is important to you. Look, if you will, at verse 14. But continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them. You have heard, you've been taught, don't forget what you've learned. Remember it, think about it, meditate on it, put it to practice, don't forget it. Time and attention is limited. I cannot pay attention to multiple things at one time. I can act like I am, and the truth of the matter is I'll miss information from both of them, or all of them. I'll get bits and pieces, but I won't get everything. At work. Work is not a quiet environment, okay? Not by any stretch. I mentioned earlier, the silence is deafening. When it's into the shift and the equipment shuts down, the noise is loud, or the silence is loud, because it's been noisy for the last 6.5 hours. So I'm calling one department on the phone, have a radio here, and oh, blessed situation, I've got a speaker for the intercom 30 feet behind me. So I'm on the phone, radio's going, I'm sitting like this with my hand over the speaker. I'm on the phone, and then the intercom goes, I can't hear a word that's going on. I'll tell them, hey, just wait a minute, I cannot hear you. Too many things going on, I can't hear everything at once. And in the world we live in, everything's talking at one time. If I'm going to hear God, I need to push all that stuff aside and focus intently for the purpose of learning so that I can live. Father, would you guide in all that we do? God, help us to be a people who look at the Word, who listen to what you have for us, God, so that we can learn it, so that we can live it. Would you please accomplish your purpose within our lives? Father, I ask you to be with the service to come, to be with the pastor, give him the words to say. Again, God, help us to listen so that we can put it to practice, we ask in your name, amen. Hey, have a great day.